All right, welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're not just looking at holiday family drama as, a series of simple misunderstandings or ruined dinners. No, we're treating it like a fascinating psychological crime scene. We aren't here to just describe toxic behavior. We are going to deconstruct it, completely unpacking the hidden evolutionary and neurological forces that are actually driving human behavior right there at the dinner table.
So, we're all sold this cultural narrative, right? Perfect harmony, warmth, the joyful reunion. But for survivors of toxic family dynamics who are returning to dysfunctional systems, that expectation creates a really jarring cognitive dissonance. This idealized vision collides violently with the visceral, physical reality of complex trauma.
Which leads us to the big question. Why do these celebrations so often end in psychological warfare? In this explainer, we're going to investigate the hidden emotional drivers, the unconscious cognitive biases, and the systemic unspoken rules that transform a simple family gathering into a literal arena for emotional sabotage. We are going to uncover exactly what is happening just beneath the surface.
Okay, let's jump into Section 1, Anatomy of Holiday Sabotage, otherwise known as the ruined dinner.
Let's look at what everyone else sees versus what's actually going on under the hood. To onlookers, it's just a sudden, totally irrational argument over the mashed potatoes. But what's actually happening? It's a rapid, unconscious threat assessment. When you walk in your childhood home, your brain's amygdala, which is basically our ancient survival radar, gets immediately activated by familiar sensory inputs. Literally, before your prefrontal cortex can even process that you're a safe, independent adult, your nervous system is hijacked by implicit memories of childhood trauma. You are thrown into severe hypervigilance.
And the crucial insight here is that you aren't just reacting to a snide comment. You are physically and emotionally regressing. You are unconsciously deploying the exact survival tactics you used as a defenseless child. In that moment, your body literally does not believe you're an adult. It's a profound, involuntary physiological time jump.
Moving on to Section 2, the vulnerable ego. Let's profile the saboteurs.
So let's examine our primary suspects, the two faces of narcissism. Now, both types view the holiday as a direct threat to their fragile egos, simply because communal traditions steal their spotlight. The grandiose narcissist, they demand center stage, wildly exaggerating successes just to force the room's attention. The vulnerable narcissist, on the other hand, operates completely in the shadows. They're finding petty faults, acting slighted, or just ruining the mood to assert their superiority through chaos.
But what are the hidden motives driving this? Well, there's jealousy and a really deep intolerance for genuine intimacy. But if we dig deeper into the behavioral science, there is an actual sadistic gratification at play here. Causing distress yields a massive rush of dopamine. It validates their power and alleviates this chronic internal emptiness they feel. They will absolutely weaponize chaos, like manufacturing a sudden crisis right as you're leaving for a party, simply to force the psychological territory back under their control.
Then, to put a number on it, there is the estimated 1.6% of the population living with borderline personality disorder. Now, while narcissism is driven by ego preservation, BPD sabotage is driven by a terrifying, misfiring attachment system. For these folks, rejection sensitivity is so severe that a perfectly neutral facial expression or even a minor change in plans is tragically processed by the brain as total abandonment. And that triggers them to abruptly lash out or withdraw entirely, just to protect themselves.
All right, Section 3, Weaponizing the dog whistle. Let's look at the invisible attack. This tactic is fascinating because it brilliantly illustrates how abusers maintain absolute plausible deniability while inflicting maximum psychological distress. A psychological dog whistle operates exactly like a real one. The rest of the room hears a perfectly innocent conversation, but the target's nervous system hears a deafening, high-pitched threat. Let's look at the evidence here. It could be culinary devaluation. Picture a husband loudly complimenting his wife's fried eggs. To the guests, it's sweet, but it's actually a long-standing private insult about her worth. It could be a sibling code word or simply the look. To the outside world, these actions are completely benign, but to the target, they are a Pavlovian trigger. It's a neurological tripwire carrying years of conditioned fear.
And this creates the absolute perfect psychological trap, the reactive abuse cycle. Think of it in steps. First, the covert provocation, the dog whistle. Second, the target's nervous system snaps and they react with visible emotional distress. Third, the abuser instantly pivots. They point the finger and play the victim. And finally, the clueless onlookers actually pathologize the real victim. The target's perfectly natural biological survival reaction is successfully weaponized right against them. It's wild.
And this yields what we call the trifecta of narcissistic supply. This invisible crime proves just how incredibly calculated the illusion really is. In one single sequence, the abuser gets internal validation, they re-exert absolute dominance over their target, and they harvest a goldmine of sympathy from all the witnesses. It is a masterful, unseen manipulation.
Okay, Section 4, the Family System Syndicate. Let's talk about unconscious roles. You might be wondering, why doesn't the rest of the family intervene? Well, according to family systems theory, dysfunctional groups maintain their equilibrium through rigid, unconscious jobs. Evolutionarily speaking, humans are wired to prioritize group cohesion over individual truth because, historically, exile literally meant death, so the family unconsciously conforms to protect the toxic homeostasis. Every single member of this syndicate is essentially forced to play a specific part to absorb the abuser's pathology. You've got the lost child who literally disappears into the background to avoid sensory overstimulation. You have the mascot, distracting the room with jokes the second the neurological tension spikes, and the enabler, using intense cognitive dissonance to rationalize the abuser's behavior because they're absolutely terrified of a total systemic collapse. You see, these aren't just cute personality quirks. They are desperate, deeply ingrained survival mechanisms.
And right at the center of this dynamic is a matched set: the golden child and the scapegoat. The golden child acts as a pure extension of the narcissistic parent's ego, but this whole illusion of perfection, it absolutely requires a vessel for all the family's disowned shame and unacknowledged pathology, and that is the scapegoat's job. If the scapegoat sets boundaries or leaves, the entire system panics. Why? Because the toxicity suddenly needs a new place to go. Which brings us to our final section, Section 5, breaking the psychological loop and achieving self-preservation.
The very first and honestly most vital step to surviving this is radical acceptance. You literally have to override your brain's natural optimism bias and acknowledge that a cluster B personality structure is not going to magically rewire itself for the holidays. By accepting that they're going to execute the exact same baiting behaviors, you completely neutralize their power to disappoint you.
Next up, you've got to implement strict preservation protocols. Regulate your nervous system in the car before you even cross the threshold. Stick to intensely neutral conversation topics, and most importantly, do not react to the dog whistles. By actively, consciously withholding your biological emotional reaction, you starve them of their narcissistic supply. You instantly dismantle their control.
As the source material profoundly notes, healing often begins with language. Once you can finally zoom out and see the rigid, predictable architecture of this psychological crime, a massive cognitive weight lifts off your shoulders. You realize their behavior was absolutely, fundamentally never about you. It's entirely about their own internal wounds, their shame, and the rigid jobs the system demands just to survive. So, I'm going to leave you with this final provocative thought. Now that you can clearly see the invisible strings of systemic family sabotage, what role are you simply going to refuse to play at the next gathering? Ultimately, your presence in their ecosystem is a choice. So what boundaries will you draw to protect your peace?